Welcome back to another episode of the Jordan Checker podcast where I'm joined by Dr. Dean Miller. Dean is a sleep and exercise scientist with a PhD examining sleep and jet lag among athletes. As the director of Chase Science Consultancy, Dean helps high-performance athletes, shift workers, and military personnel manage sleep and recovery to optimize performance. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about a variety of topics ranging from why some people function better in the mornings versus the evenings, sleeping to your chronotype, habit-based tools to improve sleep time and quality, sleep requirements for health versus performance, just how accurate are wearables such as Whoop bands, best way to get over jet lag, optimizing sleep as a shift worker, and much, much more. If you haven't already, please do subscribe on either Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube and enjoy the episode. An interesting topic I've kind of been bouncing around and thinking about recently as someone that I've been PTing for 4 years. And people always tell me that, oh, you'll get used to the early mornings eventually. And I've not fucking used to the early mornings. Like waking up at 5 has never got easier for me. And I've always found the concept of like staying up later and working has been much easier for me since I can remember through school, all that. Is that a genetic sort of thing that people are more night owls versus the early risers?
Yeah, so what you're referring to there is called chronotype. Basically, whether you're a morning, evening, or somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. You sound like an evening type.
Yeah.
Just from what you've said. And yeah, usually when we go through adolescence, when we're kids, most of us are late types. That's why teenagers always get in trouble for staying up late and then having to wake up early for school tired. But then we usually transition into adulthood, either one direction or the other. And yeah, it usually is to do with our genetics and just natural preferences. Where it actually comes from, well, the theory is that when we lived in the wild per se, if you were in a big group of people, you obviously don't want everyone sleeping at the same time to look out for predators.
Yeah.
So some people would stay up late while the others slept. Some would get up early while the others slept. And that's sort of where it's predicated from. But yeah, chronotype is something that can be sort of managed. But for people like yourself, evening types, modern society can be quite hard.
Yeah. Is that something that like, so you've mentioned obviously like part of that could be genetics, is part of that as well just the lifestyle someone's lived for majority of their life? So, you know, when you're teenage years and then maybe your first few years of adulthood, it's like that became your routine, you're used to it as well?
Yeah, for sure. And we see that in populations like individual sports like swimmers. They grow up swimming at 4 a.m. in the morning. They just grow up with that. They're used to it, and it sort of is their chronotype by proxy. So yeah, there is a naturalistic sort of side of it. So we see patterns for team sports, patterns for individual sports like that. So yeah, it is environmental sort of.
For someone then, like I said, 4 years and I've not got used to it, can you train yourself into the other way, or is part of it, like you said, unfortunately in the modern world, people like to be like, get up at fucking 5 o'clock, go. Like, and so do you have to just accept that maybe your 8 to 10 hours of work, it's okay that you do them in the latter part of the day, like, and you know, you just shift your work in and around that if possible?
If you can, I'd say work to your chronotype, your preferences. Obviously, if you can't, you have to get up at 5 a.m. There are some things you can do to sort of control your body clock and time. Like, so when you wake up, try and get some light. What that'll do is move your body clock earlier. So there are some tactics you can use. If it's highly variable, if you're waking up really early one day, then sleeping in the next day, it's really hard to do that. Yeah. But if you're being consistent, getting up at 5 a.m. every morning, getting some, obviously if the sun's not up, getting some bright artificial light as you wake up, it can push you back a little bit and could probably reduce that fatigue early in the morning.
So if you're in a job where you can tell your boss, I want to start a little bit later, you just do that. But like much.
That's what we give advice for athletes, so like swimmers. A lot of the reasons why junior athletes swim really early is because of pool availability. So if the pool's available later, let them sleep.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So then obviously diving like sleep as a general, you know, everyone knows that sleep is the key to recovery, feeling good, all these other aspects as well. But you know, if starting off with some general, I guess, advice on what should people be doing to improve sleep quality, as well as, you know, what sort of time frame should people be aiming for as maybe an optimal general pop, you know, versus an optimal athlete?
Yeah, for sure. I've probably said this on a few pages recently, but the most important thing really is consistency, and I kind of touched on it before. So we have these 24-hour biological rhythms called circadian rhythms. People call it the body clock. You'll hear it a lot on some other podcasts and social media channels. Basically, these rhythms are quite set to light, and our bodies know when we're winding down for sleep and when we're typically going to wake up. So sleeping in the period where your body expects to be asleep is going to get you the best sleep quality. So unfortunately, sometimes in everyday life, we don't have that luxury. Sometimes we're sleeping earlier, sometimes we're sleeping later. That's when your sleep quality will probably be compromised. But that's probably the number one tip, is try and have the same bedtime and same wake up time where possible, even on the weekends, unfortunately. So have a little sleep in. Yeah, I know, it's hard. Have a little sleep in, like in 90 minutes maybe, is one sleep cycle. So that's usually where I say cut it off on a Saturday morning. You still get that satisfaction of sleeping in, but you don't sleep for too long. The other thing you can do is minimize light before bed. So artificial light before bed, and in the lead into when you would usually sleep. And then in the morning, as I said before, seek light. So go out, get natural light is the best. Obviously sunrise, but if it's at the moment, it's pretty dark in the morning, so it's pretty hard. So like you have the studio lights here, something like that would be great. And what that does is it anchors our body clock to when we're waking and sleeping.
So probably maybe throw in there that doesn't mean go scroll TikTok first thing in the morning from, you're finding light that's not also giving you this absolute rise of dopamine first thing in the morning is probably a smart idea as well.
It's a good point, actually, touching on devices. When we're talking about the light from devices, often it's the light emitting part of it that people talk about sleep and how it might affect. And it's not necessarily the case that it's the light. It's the behavioral aspect of just scrolling and delaying your sleep for an hour. So definitely add that to your sleep routine. Don't necessarily worry about the phone light too much. Turn off the ceiling lights nice and sort of like a lamp level light. And focus on the behavioral side of it. Not scrolling for too long.
Plenty of people are going to be like, that's not changing anytime soon. And but from a light point of view, then, is there any difference in cool lights, warm lights? Like you mentioned a lamp, like generally that's just it's more dimmed. And these are very white, bright lights. Like I probably wouldn't want to be staring at these at nighttime versus doing these, like you said, morning, maybe a good option.
So across the light spectrum, we are more sensitive to the blue-green light, which you'll hear like blue light blocking glasses, all of these products that people are using. So we're more sensitive to that in terms of our body clock. In saying that, though, even if it's not blue-green light, it could be white, bright light. If it's bright, it's still going to impact. So it's brightness and it's the wavelength, I guess. Warmer light is better. If you have a warm lamp on in the corner while you're watching TV, that's going to have little to no effect on your body clock at night. Whereas in Australia, at least, when we transitioned into light bulbs that were more environmentally friendly, which is great for the planet, the brightness and the wavelength of them is actually quite shit for our body clock. So don't turn the big light on.
And then so you touched on like blue light blocking glasses and things like that. And every guru in the world tries to sell you those things, but is there some truth behind those, like that actually could have some benefit? Obviously, depending on still where that stimulation is coming from. If it's like I'm wearing blue light blocking glasses but I'm watching TikTok for 2 hours, it's like it's probably not helping you too much.
So we've had versions of blue blockers for years. Typically the ones that we used to use in the lab are super ugly orange tint. So basically what the orange tint usually does is block out that blue-green wavelength of light. And it can certainly help. So as long as the blue blockers that you're using are sort of validated in that they can block that certain wavelength of light at night, then scientifically and practically they should help. But you could also just turn off the light. So if you're wearing your blue blockers while you're, like you say, you work at night and you work within an hour of going to bed and you've got a big screen and you're editing this video potentially, you can chuck the blue blockers on or just turn your brightness down. It's just another tool that you can use to avoid that stimulus.
And then in terms of sleep quality versus sleep length.
Yep.
Like, it's very easy to be like, I aim for 8 hours. And so we'll touch on this a little bit later, but like the Whoop bands and things like that. And I'm going to put my hand up and say I'm a massive skeptic. But I'm so interesting. Like, I'm wearing it to try and prove myself wrong in order to prove myself right, kind of thing as well. But I was like, you know what, I don't want to knock something until I've tried it. But one thing I have really noticed in just a week and a half of wearing it, and I knew it was a thing, I probably didn't know to what extent, and is that it takes me a long fucking time to fall asleep. And I don't know, like, I try and not go on my phone too much. Maybe I could be a little bit better. Like, it's, maybe it's only half an hour or so before bed, limiting working half an hour before, or, an hour before bed at least, probably more for the work. But like some nights it's, I'll go to bed, say at 8:45 or whatever, and it says I didn't fall asleep until like 10.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm like, okay, that's a long time where I'm like, should I have just stayed up or like...
To answer your first question about sort of duration, typically in the past there's been a whole lot of recommendations about ranges and how much sleep people need. Gen Pop ranging from 7 to 9 hours. There is individual variability, as there is with a lot of things around how much sleep people need. I would say aim over 7 consistently. If you can do 8, fantastic. In terms of athlete populations, there was a recent study that literally just asked athletes, how much sleep do you think you need to feel rested? And it averaged out at about 8.2 hours per night. And only I think it was probably 3% of them were actually getting to their own benchmark. So I think they were averaging 6.2 or something. So it's the answer somewhere in between 7 and 9 for most people. Anything under 7 on a consistent basis is going to have an impact on your performance. And some people might say to you, "Oh, I get 5 hours of sleep a night and I'm fine." And we've seen the studies, if you're consistently getting below that 7 hours, if you're getting say 5 hours each night, your performance is going to maintain, but at a lower capacity. So you're not going to notice the decrements because you're doing the same each day. So yeah, in terms of quantity, that's sort of the recommendations.
Is that from a health standpoint as well? Like you touched on, obviously that's from a performance, but is that very similar? Like if you're going under 7, you're going to start to see like potential decline in health as well. Yeah,
for sure. Any reduction or consistent reduction in sleep, we know is sort of associated with immune health or worse immune health, and you're more compromised to viruses. And even when you get your yearly flu vaccination, we know that if you sleep poorly the night before, it's going to be less effective. When you get your vaccination, you might end up getting sick after that. So we know that there's a tight link, and there's a link with diet as well. When we're sleeping less, we are more predisposed to reaching for the unhealthy foods because it's impacting those hunger hormones. So yeah, it sort of just rolls on to basically most physiological processes.
So then for someone like myself, that feels like I'm doing a fairly good job at nighttime of reducing light, or could, like I said, self-admitted, could do better, but I lay on the pillow and my mind just goes business, podcast, javelin. It's like these things, and I'm start like, and then the more you try and tell yourself to stop, the more you try and be like, oh, deep breath, the more I'm like, and brain just went straight back into it. What are some things that you can try and do to kind of switch out of that mindset? Or like I said, should I just be accepting that maybe is staying up a little bit later a better option because I'm just not falling asleep anyway?
Potentially, that could be the answer. If you're just not well timed to go to bed at 8:45, then maybe just going to bed later and not doing that to yourself, just lying in bed thinking about things. There are a few things you can do if you're struggling to fall asleep. I like to do some, well, we call it mental gymnastics. It's akin to counting sheep, really. It's distracting yourself from the thoughts that are going to keep you up at night. I like to do things like going through the alphabet of footy players, or like usually when I get to R or S, I'm falling asleep. So it's just little tactics like that. Some people like to do like diaphragmatic breathing, not anything like counting how many seconds you're breathing in and breathing out. You can do that if that suits. Anything that's sort of going to distract you from thinking about things you don't want to think about, or sort of down regulate our system when you can actually feel your body calming down. That's definitely going to help. And then if you are sort of, we're all busy these days, and if you find yourself thinking about work while you're in bed, writing down a checklist for the next day or what you're going to do or what you're worrying about, just putting it on a page before you get into bed.
Yep.
Can also help.
Yeah, perfect. And then in terms of, so once you're asleep, you've found yourself in that position, and now you've got REM sleep, deep sleep, light sleep. Where should we be hoping, if we are wearing a wearable or something like that, that we're seeing percentages or time spent in those zones as well?
Yep, cool. And that sort of loops us back to your question about wearables. Is practically, what I look at when I look at my data is just total sleep time.
Yep.
If I'm maintaining that regular bedtime and wake up time, my body's going to sort of regulate those stages as needed. So I don't think looking at sort of changes in percentages of slow wave sleep is sort of gonna help action anything for individuals or athletes.
Yep.
So what I would focus on is look the total sleep time. With wearables in general, measuring sleep from the wrist is quite challenging. So how we measure it in the lab is the wires on your brain, and we look at the brain waves. So it's quite a complex process, and they do quite well. So with the sleep staging, the good ones, so like Whoop, Aura, and that sort of mold, they set it around 65% for sleep staging, which is quite good. But when you're in the lab and you're comparing across individuals, it's about 80%. So when you're thinking about sleep, you probably don't need to think any more about sleep staging other than keeping your sleep consistent.
Yeah. Is that because generally if you are improving the sleep duration, they all kind of move with it anyway? Like it's, my REM sleep's down. It's like, but that's as a result of like everything's down.
Yeah.
And then so once that, total time comes up, then so will REM, deep sleep, and all those other things as well.
Yeah, potentially. So consistency and duration is going to help with quality and sleep staging. If you do see like a drastic change in your device's reporting of your sleep staging, it may be something else with your physiology that may be changing. Because all these devices are trained on algorithms, and they're detecting changes. So you might be getting sick. That might affect how it scores slow wave sleep or REM across all devices, and all of these algorithms are sort of proprietary. So a lot of the time we don't know what actually is going into them. We have a rough idea, but if you do see like you have 0% of a certain stage, it might potentially just be like a high training load period or something else going on in your physiology.
Is there a high chance that most of what they're finding their data from is like heart rate and like movement? Maybe like if the more restless you are, the less likely you're probably sleeping, and then if your heart rate's still above your resting, then it's like, well, you're unlikely sleeping, and so it might be a little bit more simple than we like to think as well when we buy some of these products.
So typically the devices we used in the past were pure movement. So it was just ones and zeros. You're moving is one, you're not asleep. 0 for an extended period of time, you're asleep. So the new devices they use, they still use that system. They use the movement. They use heart rate variability, breathing rate, and oxygen saturation. So there's way more metrics that go into it these days. The only difference between the devices is how they weight them, and that's what we don't know. So, we could take an educated guess. It's probably mostly movement, heart rate, and heart rate variability, fluctuating throughout the night. So all of these companies will collect the gold standard data, compare it to what they are collecting with their devices, and then try to mesh the two together to come out with the same outcome. And they are doing a reasonable job. It's just how we implement it in everyday life.
So have they like done like where comparing like data and results from Whoop Band versus rigging yourself up fully with the wires and seeing how accurate some of those things are as well?
Yeah, so I've personally done those studies. So we did one with 6 different wearables, and basically what we found was most of the commercially available sleep devices are great for measuring sleep and wake. So the total amount of sleep, as you'll probably hear me harp on about. The difficulty with these devices is really hard to tell when you're awake within sleep. So there's little bouts of wake that you may not even realize you're waking up a few times each night. It's really hard to detect that from the wrist. So we know that they're quite good at the sleep part of it, and then the stages sort of may develop in the future to be as good as that. But in general, these commercially available devices, that's how we would recommend to use them. Yeah.
And what if you are getting your recommended time and you're just constantly, you're like, I've slept 8.5 hours for the last month straight. still feel tired every day? Like, is that more now we're starting to look at lifestyle, like maybe there's a mental health aspect maybe of that as well, but are there potentially some other things that aren't just not triggering properly, whether it's melatonin or whatever it is?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, if you're getting consistently good sleep and you're fatigued throughout the day, we conceptualize it with sort of daytime sleepiness. So if you're sitting at work in the middle of the day and you've had a great night's sleep after a few hours and you're ready to go back to bed, there could be a number of underlying sleep conditions. It might be something to do with high training load if you're an athlete, or illness, or it could be anything. So if you have a continued stretch of great sleep but you're still sleepy during the day, then I'll definitely go to the GP and talk about sleep. There could be something related to sleep apnea depending on the population, because you may sleep for an extended period of time, but the quality might not be sufficient.
Is that so down to like whether you can actually, whether you're breathing through your nose, mouth? I've heard people talk about like, I don't know, clenching of the jaw or something, depending how tense. What sort of factors could be, not that you can probably really control them, but apart from maybe like taping your mouth shut, which is not comfortable for most people. But
there's sleep. There's different types of sleep apnea. Some are related to airways. You might just have bad airways that collapse during the night. It's more related to older populations. Some athletes, like in rugby, some forms of physiology lend themselves to problems with sleep apnea. So it's basically like breathing disorders, and that's going to compromise our quality of sleep because you're not bringing in the oxygen needed to sort of maintain that sleep. In terms of, but if you're a healthy individual like yourself, or if you're an athlete and you're not having conscious breathing issues and you're not snoring really loudly and your partner's waking you up every few hours, you should be okay in that sense and shouldn't worry too much about trying to mouth tape or breathe through your nose. Physiologically, breathing through your nose is better, but there's no like concrete evidence yet for mouth taping.
What are the suggestions behind like the nasal breathing as to why that's a more beneficial way? Just, I guess, on a day-to-day basis, walking around trying to breathe through your nose, not necessarily just from a sleep point of view either.
Yeah, so, generally we can filter the air better through our nose. So from an immune health side of things, it's better. And oral health, I think, I'm not a dentist or any oral hygienist or anything, but day to day, I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference. If you can ask me like my top 5 tips for sleeping better, it probably won't feature unless you're reporting really loud snoring or problems with breathing during sleep. Then I would just refer you to a sleep doctor.
And so how does then training times and or competition times affect someone's ability to fall asleep? Like it's, like with yourself working with like athletes and things like that, generally competitions are at nighttime. For most professional athletes in a paid sport, their trainings are in the middle of the day. But like I know, for me in a sport like javelin, you're not getting paid. So trainings are generally after work hours. So, that's later in the day. How does that impact things?
Yeah, it's a massive issue, particularly with competition. So we know sleep is very much compromised after night competition, whether that be because of competition caffeine intake or media commitments for some sports, and just getting to bed later than you usually would. So in the context of competition, we just make sure the athletes know that, hey, it's a one night. As long as you rebound from that really well, you're going to be fine. So we know even after a 6 or 7 day stretch of bad sleep, if you get 1 or 2 days recovery sleep really well, you're going to recover back to baseline most likely. So that's the first thing we say to the athletes, is don't stress too much over one night. In terms of training or even just exercise during the night, so we did a study in our lab where we got people to exercise 90 minutes before we send them to bed, and at a moderate intensity. So obviously not a high intensity or high training load session.
So for people that maybe aren't the understanding of the training intensities, what does that sort of training look like at a moderate load?
So in this particular study, we did it was 90 minutes at 75% heart rate maximum. So usually 220 minus your age is your heart rate max usually for most people. And we did that for aerobic exercise, and then we did resistance exercise as well. So going to the gym and lifting weights. And what we did for that one was 75% of maximum 10 reps.
Yep.
And what we found is as long as you have that 90-minute buffer, they slept fine. Yep. So we tracked core body temperature, and we saw a really nice decrease in core body temperature in the lead into sleep.
Yep.
Potentially if we did a high intensity session, so if you're thinking about the sessions where you're keeled over and maximum effort type things, that core body temperature potentially won't come back down before you want to go to sleep, and that might keep you up. So but there are more studies. It's a really hard thing to study, but there are more studies showing that potentially, as long as even if with high intensity exercise, potentially if you leave enough buffer, you should be fine as well.
Is that so? Like in terms of what some of the challenges, maybe then do they face? Like post competition is either the adrenaline of like just smashed it out the park, I've won a game, or on the flip side is like, oh, what did I do wrong? Like I played shit and whatever, and then so they go back to the scenario of the person that puts their head on the pillow and now their mind's just spinning as well. Like that and the caffeine are playing a massive role in what they can do. So the easy solution for that is just go back to do what you can sort of thing. Like it's not, there's no special supplements or anything crazy that you should be taking in a situation like that. Like it's go back to your habits, find yourself back in a routine and just go back to it. Yeah,
pretty well. So no supplementation or anything that I would suggest in that context. If you were say away for a comp and you had to perform late at night and got to go back to your hotel room 2 or 3 hours later than you would usually go to sleep, then just start your usual sleep routine as you would. And then if, say, you're still being affected by caffeine and you're in bed wide staring at the ceiling, get up, do something really relaxing, whether it's breathing techniques or yoga or you want to read a book in dim light. You can try things like that. And it's really individualized, really. So there's no right or wrong way to do it as long as you sort of put your bedtime routine in place.
So is that some of the things like to do to lower that core body temperature? Is that maybe ice baths, things like that as well can come into play, or does that kind of send you in the opposite direction?
It's a tricky one, and we don't have enough evidence to give that answer enough weight yet. I would suggest not, just because it's such an ice bath would be such a strong stimulus pre-bed, unless it's absolutely critical for your recovery. If it's a high contact sport, potentially you might do it to make sure that you're feeling good the next day in terms of muscle soreness,
not a cripple,
etc. So like rugby or something like that potentially might help, but not specifically for sleep. As long as you give enough buffer from an effort to when you get into bed, your body should regulate.
I guess then touching on the ice baths in general, it's everyone loves them at the moment. It'll probably pass, but hopefully to some extent at least it's making people health aware, I guess, as well. Where should people, so you mentioned then if you're doing it at nighttime, is that steer away from that if possible in general? If it's a part of their routine, they want to do it daily, they should really opt for the morning routine part of that?
I don't think it needs to necessarily be morning, and I think unless you have an ice bath at home, it's going to be pretty hard to do it that close to sleep, unless you're doing it in your normal bath. But there's been a lot of work in the past around either heating the body or cooling the body during the day and how it impacts sleep. And there's varying evidence to whether it increases slow wave sleep, REM, et cetera. But what I generally say to people who want to do ice baths or contrast therapy is it's for recovery, not for sleep necessarily yet. So do it during the day, even if you're doing it early evening. It's sort of the same concept as exercise, I think. So as long as your body's allowed to regulate back to baseline levels prior to starting your bedtime routine, then if it makes you feel good, go for it.
I mean, I see a lot of people having now differing opinions on icing, like it's whether that's from a full immersion side of things or whether that's like icing an isolated injury or area. What are some, what are we kind of looking at there? Like let's say you've cop a few knocks, is that and you want to ice that, is that different to feel like I've strained my hamstring or something, should I be icing that? Like does soreness mean put ice on it still? Because that was obviously, what's the normal, ice, compress, elevate sort of thing?
I guess that's probably more of a question for a physio. I don't want to speak out of turn, but when we typically use cold therapy, it's more on the recovery side of things rather than an injury. So,
Yep.
Yeah, I'll have to pass you on to my mates at Physio Society
I'll get them on next.
for that one. But yeah, basically any recovery modality that we use is probably more related to adaptation or recovery from training rather than an injury. So even just getting in a pool doesn't have to be cold. Yeah. It's going to have that pressure. That's going to help with recovery. But yeah, in terms of injuries, probably not my wheelhouse.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'd rather you did that rather than be too many people try and bullshit their way through things, don't they? So that's good. You've touched on shift work a little bit before, I've noticed. I think it was when I was doing my nutrition course, it was the best advice you could give to someone that's a shift worker is quit your job and get a new one. From a health point of view, people can't always just quit their jobs and get a new one. What's some advice around, your sleep routines as a shift worker?
Yep. I've been there. So when I was working in a sleep lab, obviously I have to stay up and watch the sleep. And it'll vary depending on the shifts that you work, the environment that you're in, whether it's dark or bright, and obviously your daily lifestyle factors. So to give a definitive answer for everyone is a bit hard, but some of the tactics that you implement are sort of personalized. So whether you chunk your sleep into two, or whether you do one big sleep before or after. I used to sleep for about 3 hours before a night shift and then go back and sleep 2 hours after and hopefully get a nap in between in the middle of the day. But generally is sort of understanding how the body clock moves, which it does take, I guess, a bit of homework. So I guess if you're a shift worker and your workplace doesn't really provide you with much information about how the body clock and sleep pressure works, definitely look it up. So basically, I'll try and be concise with it. We have two processes that impact our sleep. So when we wake up in the morning, we have this build up of a molecule called adenosine or adenosine, however you want to say it. And basically that builds up as long as we're awake. And the only way to get rid of that is to go back to sleep. That's the process that caffeine impacts, right? So when you drink caffeine, it blocks the receptors for that molecule, and then you feel great. And then when it goes away,
does that make people think that caffeine makes them super energized and really pumped, but what it really does is it stops you from being tired more so? Is that kind of what you're trying to, like, that's what you're suggesting there?
It does have a sort of ergogenic effect as well. So it will give you that little kick, but for the most part, for fatigue and for shift workers, that's probably your best tool for when we've been awake for an extended period of time. It's going to hold off that fatigue for as long as it's in your body. Some people metabolize it a little bit faster. So if you are going to use caffeine to help with that fatigue, make sure that you're doing it at an optimal time. So potentially not having it within the first hour of your night shift when you're not really that tired. Maybe have it 3 or 4 hours when you know you're into the night shift when
you need it.
Because having less of it does affect your sensitivity. We've got the sleep pressure side, and then we've got the body clock side. So the body clock side fluctuates over 24 hours. And if you say you do 3 or 4 night shifts in a row, that's enough to move your body clock into the night phase. If you do one night shift, it's not going to move you. So you don't have to take into consideration that much. But when coming off a long block of night shifts, again, try and get out in the natural light to move yourself back into those rhythms.
What about someone that's working like always nighttime? Like their whole job is nights versus, there's probably not a huge amount of jobs, or less like majority of their job is overnight. There's some jobs that are like that. It's pretty challenging to sleep during the day when everything else is happening, things are going on. Is it a matter of darkening the room and find that routine just on the flip side of the day? Yeah,
pretty much. So my brother-in-law was a baker for many years, and even with the social aspect of it, right? Like people will have parties or gatherings when you're typically going to be asleep. So it's hard to manage. The sleep principles, though, they sort of are the same. So when you want to sleep, keep the room nice and dark, nice and cool. And if you're doing Monday to Friday all night shifts, you're probably going to be most compromised on the weekend because you're going to be so entrenched in the night shifts. You'll probably feel worse on the weekend because that's when you're out of whack. So yeah, it's a difficult one to manage because the 2 days isn't going to be enough time for you to shift back into normal life timing. So it's just learning how to manage that and where you sort of sit in your sleep patterns. You might nap a little bit more on the weekends just to maintain that. But again, duration is key. So if you're getting those 8 hours, or 7 hours, if it's split into two, that's fine too.
Yeah. And when it comes to napping, then should we be cutting that off at a certain time? Like, you don't want to let that turn into a full sleep cycle potentially.
Yeah. So for shift work, it's a bit harder. So I would say try and get as much sleep as possible whenever you can. For people that sleep at night, typically before 4 p.m., so that you're not compromising that nighttime sleep. Keep it to the recommendations we have for athletes is between 20 to 90 minutes. Obviously, with higher training load, we need a bit more sleep. But yeah, I think for general pop, that would be fine too, as long as you're sleeping, keeping that before 4 p.m. And yeah, you can do fun little tactics. Like if it's going to be a 20-minute nap, you can have a coffee beforehand. And by the time you wake up, the caffeine kicks in and you feel... don't feel that groggy sleep inertia.
So is that how long it roughly takes for caffeine to actually
roughly
enter the system? Like, so people that feel like they buzz straight away, that's probably like the placebo of you've just drank the thing. Whereas, or like you said, metabolize at different rates as well.
Yeah. So it will vary, but it could be the placebo effect. Don't tell them that.
Cut that bit out. Yeah, that's interesting. So I want to then back to the wearables a little bit because, like I said, I'm a skeptic for many reasons, and I guess this is probably coming from my point of view as someone that I've never had trouble, I guess, trying to optimize health and fitness and those sort of things. That's very much a big number one in my life, always has been. So my challenge is when I see general pop people using them is I worry that they're going to look at the metrics and it determines their whole life. Oh, not recovered enough, can't train today. So what advice would you give to those people? And what, we've said they're fairly accurate in terms of sleep and things like that as well. Should people really be taking it by gospel and listening to that and over listening to their body and, algorithm versus personal feeling?
Yeah, it's a great question. In terms of, most wearables, I think these days are providing some sort of recovery score or readiness score. And they're all predicated on the numbers behind them. So when you go in, you'll see your total sleep, you'll see your heart rate variability. And for people that don't know what heart rate variability is, basically it's a measure of how the distance between heartbeats is probably the simplest way to term it. When we have a longer or have more variable heart rate variability, it suggests that we're recovered better. So it's related to the autonomic nervous system. So the parasympathetic branch is the system that slows you down. So if you're breathing really slowly, for example, that's a parasympathetic response. The sympathetic response is sort of, it gets a bad rap. People equate it with stress, which is correct, but it's also the system that's going to keep you alert or performing in a sport. Basically what heart rate variability suggests is is the balance between those two systems, and it's never ever going to be one or the other. It's always a contribution from both. So predominantly that's what the recovery scores are pulling their recommendations from. We know that heart rate variability is pretty good at, the devices are pretty good at estimating heart rate variability these days. But the recovery score, we don't really know. Again,
just an algorithm,
what goes into it. We can take a good guess. What I would say is focus on the raw metrics: resting heart rate variability, total sleep time. Not to say that recovery scores and readiness scores don't have a place. I would say if you woke up feeling shit and you had a green, like a really high recovery score, maybe temper your training that day or maybe focus on recovery, and vice versa. So if you're feeling good and it's really your heart rate variability is really low compared to your baseline, maybe think about adjusting your training. But day to day is is less meaningful, I guess, than extended periods. So if you, for example, you've been wearing a device for a couple of weeks and you're seeing great recovery and great sleep, and then for the next week or two you're seeing really bad, then potentially that's something you go, oh, maybe there's something I'm doing I could change. But one day of bad scores, maybe don't stress too much.
Yeah. So zoom out a little bit when you're looking at these sort of things. Like,
Correct.
Don't take it out of the box and first day be like, haha, that's exactly what I should be kind of listening to and taking it by gospel.
Yeah, for sure. And with heart rate variability as well, I've seen a lot of people compare their scores, and it's a question I get a lot.
Seen that on a few podcasts.
And heart rate variability is highly individualized. So I could have a heart rate variability of 100, and you could have a heart rate variability of 50. It doesn't mean that I'm healthier or more recovered than you. It's just, so I've seen elite athletes with really comparatively low HRVs, and then Gen Pop with really high HRVs. It's really important to just compare to your own baseline rather than compare across individuals.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, and you're looking at different elements and pulling them together, like you said, like your resting heart rate, HRV, sleep time, and all that. Not just looking at one element on its own as well.
Yeah, correct.
It's quite interesting because I don't know if you know Joe Gauci, like the one of the Australian keepers. I had him on, and he was like, he wears his, and we shared opinions on it as well. And he said, like, one day he woke up and recovery was crap or something like that, went out and played an absolute blinder. And it was kind of that day where it was like, okay, these things are cool, they're important and they're very beneficial, but I'm not going to let it determine the kind of day I'm going to have and the performance I'm going to have as well.
It's a great point. And I think even the companies themselves will probably frame it in this way, is that it's more of an indication of how well you've recovered. It's not an indication of how well you can perform. So outside of the wearable context, I've spoken to athletes that didn't sleep a wink the night before a comp and then went out and got a PB the next day. So it's a really useful tool for training and for long periods of tracking where you're at. But day to day, you can still break your personal records if you wake up with shitty data.
Yeah, it's interesting because I guess like there's so many people that just get led by these things as well. I've had people come to me and they're like, "Oh, should we have an easier sessions today?" Like this one says that. I'm like, man, you're just looking for anything and everything to get out of this training session, which I guess probably comes back to, it's that person's general habits and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. Like if they're in that mindset, they're going to constantly find those things. And so what you're like. If you're not that type of person, then you could probably make the most out of something like this as well. If someone's kind of like, they're like, I feel pretty good. Like, is there any need to be outsourcing and maybe let's call it overcomplicating to some of these wearables and other different techniques and things like that? Or you kind of go, it's working, just keep doing what you're doing.
So you mean if they're doing what they're doing really well without a wearable?
Yeah, or like just other, I guess, tactics in general. Like they're not doing breathing techniques. They're not doing any. They're maybe they do sleep well after watching TikTok for an hour and a half. It's like, all right, if that's what maybe disconnects you from the real world and makes you sleep, like maybe we're not running out and recommending it, but like it's sure if it, you don't have to do the X, Y, and Z just because that's the perfect way of doing it. Yeah,
if you're sleeping well, you're happy with your routines. Usually I just try to reverse engineer whatever issue someone comes to me with. And I've said this in a few talks now, and I don't think it's the best term to use, but I'm not going to yuck your yum. Like if you really like doing something and I know it's not going to like significantly impact your sleep, maybe not scrolling TikTok, don't do that too late. But as long as if it's a behavior that you enjoy doing and you're sleeping fine and all the boxes are ticked, then you don't have to add anything. You can if you want to, if you think it's gonna make you feel better or help you sleep better. But it's not. There's a long list of non-essential tactics.
I guess people just overcomplicate some things as well, don't they? And then you lay in bed and you run through this list of, have I done that, and then now you've put yourself in the state of not being able to sleep because you're stressed about the fact that you didn't drink your water with salt in it or something. I don't know. Like it's, I feel like the world we live in, you go on social media and there's some new hack or tactic that you should be doing, and then we end up just overcomplicating and overstressing ourselves to try and get the optimal anyway. Yeah,
well, the way I usually answer that question is that I've been working in this space for 6-7 years now, and do it on a daily basis. And I do very little of these 1%ers. Like I just keep it simple.
Yeah.
And doesn't mean you don't have to. You can't add tactics to your sleep routine, but yeah, my things are just constant sleep routine and light, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
So keeping it simple is probably the first port of call.
What about people that run to things like a melatonin supplement because they're like, oh, I'm not sleeping well, like, or is that something that maybe has some benefit if you're unwell and you can't sleep well, so you don't mind upping that a little bit?
Yeah, melatonin is a big one and probably the most misunderstood. So your melatonin's a naturally occurring hormone in our brain. Basically kicks in when we're preparing for bed, probably about 2 hours before we usually go to bed. Melatonin supplements are basically just the synthetic form of it, and are really useful for people with sleep disorders, and can help with jet lag when used correctly. The thing about melatonin though is, one, it'll make you sleepy, it'll help you fall asleep, much like not exactly like a sleeping tablet, but it will give you that hypnotic effect. The second thing it does is it actually moves your body clock. So if you take it at the wrong time, for example, if you fell asleep and then woke up in the middle of the night and couldn't get back to sleep and popped a melatonin, it actually might move your body clock the wrong way. Yeah, okay. So the next night, it's kind of fucked your sleep up the next night. So, and a lot of people that I know have been given melatonin don't know that. So I think responsible use of melatonin is really important. If you're struggling to sleep or someone has insomnia, or it can be really effective at helping you fall asleep, as long as you're taking it in that 2 hours, or between 2 hours or just before bed, to help you fall asleep. But I wouldn't be reaching for the melatonin unless, as you said, there's a problem. So if you're sleeping fine, then there's no use.
And when someone does get to that stage, what sort of dosage are you talking about there?
It would vary in terms of age and sort of the problem. But I'd speak to a physician first, and then probably refer to a sleep doctor or someone with expertise in sleep. I know like a few of my mates who are medical doctors. So I have a PhD in sleep, but I'm not a medical doctor. But they don't get much sleep education. A lot of the GPs and it's an area where whenever I speak to someone that's a GP or works in a hospital, they want to learn more about it. So I would definitely reach out if you're having issues with sleep and want to try melatonin. Reach out to a doctor that has some expertise around.
sleep. So someone that's they're honest with themselves. They've tried all these other techniques. They've dimmed the lights. They've put the cold room, breathing, whatever it is, and they're like, I just can't. Would melatonin be an option to be like, let's try, and like you said, it can reset that circadian rhythm a little bit as well, or your sleep clock. Is that something that then you might be like, okay, after trying these things, sure, try this for a few nights or something like that? Is that kind of the routine you would then opt for? Yeah,
so I would tick all the behavioral boxes. If none of the behavioral boxes are working, then that would probably be the first sleep aid that I would, or the first sort of validated, know that it will probably work sleep aid I would reach for. Definitely not sleeping tablets. If we had exhausted, and it doesn't happen too often with with athletes that we work with, if they potentially have come back from a trip with some sleep disturbances or something, that would be the first sort of aid we might try.
And it's interesting because I think I've had it a couple of times when I'm unwell or something, and you're like, well, I know that sleep is going to help me recover from this illness, so I'm going to pop this. But then I noticed that the next day in the morning I was like, oh, I'm drowsy. Like,
bit drowsy.
Is that should if you get to that stage where you're taking it, should you be taking it X amount of hours before bed, like not right as your head's about to hit the pillow?
Yeah, I would be taking it in sort of the lead up into bed, so maybe an hour, 30 minutes. But make sure within that hour, 30 minutes, you don't have anything to do. You don't want to be going out to the servo in the car or something after you've popped it. That's really important. So sort of emulating the natural occurrence of melatonin, which is about 2 hours before bed. So anywhere in between 2 hours to sort of 30 minutes, I guess you could try. And then, if you're waking up drowsy, maybe speak to your doctor about the dosage.
And you touch on jet lag there. So, what can people be doing, if they travel a lot for work or sport? Luckily, probably in Australia, you're not suffering jet lag if you travel for sport massively. Like our time zones are not, there's the odd place that is drastically different, but melatonin, like you said, a lot of people do it wrong. How do you do it right? And what are some other things that people could do habit-wise before reaching for the melatonin?
Typically, we actually, because it is quite complex to implement, we don't typically recommend the melatonin use for jet lag. Okay. It can be done. So if you are already using melatonin, we can give recommendations about when to take it. So the two things that are going to help you get over jet lag, well, the main thing is light again. The timing of the light is essential, and that'll change depending on where you're coming from, where you're going to, how long you're there for. So generally, our jet lag plans are, Jordan, you're going to Paris next year. When you fly, you're going to arrive at 10 a.m. Between maybe 2 and 5, go out and get sunlight. Immediately after that, go back to your hotel room and avoid light. And what that'll do is it'll move your body clock 2 hours each day. So you'll probably get over jet lag in about 3 days. If you had done the inverse of that and gotten light, if you flipped seek light and avoid light, you would actually move in the opposite direction, and you'd probably only get over your jet lag after about a week.
Wow.
So
that's not a fun holiday.
No. And Europe is usually pretty good because you get the afternoon light incidentally, because people are like, we're in Europe, we're going to go and go outside and see the sights. The problem is usually when people come back, because when you come back from Europe, we're really badly situated for jet lag. So you usually find that people take about a week to get over that trip. So it's highly individualized to the person, trip, and the environment.
Yeah. So even for someone that say, like soccer players, footy players in Australia that are traveling to even a place like Perth or whatever, like, is that enough to incur some form of jet lag? Yeah.
So usually we cut it off at around 3 hours. So if you are going to Perth, depending on the time of the game. So I don't know if some of the football games or the basketball games can actually be played quite late at night. Comparatively, so if you're flying from Brizzy to Perth, you might actually be playing at a really inopportune time for your body clock. So basically sunlight. It's a bit more simple because you can just say go out in the morning and get sunlight, or go out in the evening and get sunlight. And it'll usually take 1 or 2 days. But if it's fly in, fly out sort of operation, it's not worth really doing anything.
Is there any other like kind of general recovery tools, whether that's from, like you said, more from the sleep point of view as well, that people can be implementing on a consistent basis, that's like more of like those 1%ers, like I always like to frame it, say when someone's trying to lose weight, I go, here's a million ways we can do it. Let's try and find a few that work for you. What are some other options so that people can kind of pick and choose, whether that's based on I have the money to afford to do this, or I have the time to afford to do this?
So for jet lag and travel in particular, there's 2 different parts to travel. So there's jet lag and then there's travel fatigue, and they're completely separate. So travel fatigue is anything you're experiencing on flight. So the cabin pressure, dry air, you're awake for an extended period of time, most likely if you're flying in economy class. So we know that that's going to have a bad effect on recovery. So when you're in the air, wearing compression tights, so
full
medical
leg?
grade, for full leg. So you can wear the socks. We don't typically recommend the socks, but really don't wear only the socks, because that that will create a tourniquet.
Well, that's not good.
So we do typically just recommend the legs. What that's going to do is aid blood flow and make sure that it's helping circulation. Obviously, we know if you're going to be awake for an extended period of time, it's going to affect soreness and stuff. So once you get on the ground, make sure you've scoped out whether there's a pool when you arrive, and do some recovery modalities, maybe walking laps in the pool, or getting into the ocean post arrival, and then just trying to sleep as much on the plane. Those are typically the travel fatigue side of things. Not drinking alcohol on the plane, which is hard sometimes
for
people because it's free.
But
that's going to massively dehydrate us, and we know we already get dehydrated because of the cabin pressure and the environment in the air. So try and supplement with a lot of water and no alcohol if possible.
Not gin and water, just water. What in general, I guess with the alcohol, then it's not even something I kind of really thought of. How does that impact sleep?
Yeah.
in a general basis?
Topical question, and we've just submitted a paper looking at all the history of alcohol and sleep papers, and we know, well, the nightcap, right? It helps you fall asleep, much like a sleeping tablet. So it'll take you quicker to fall asleep, but we know the quality is compromised, so it's going to change the quality of your sleep. It potentially delays some of the stages of sleep, the restorative stages that we want to maintain. So yeah, definitely does not have a great impact on sleep. The closer you have it to sleep as well, it's probably going to exacerbate that problem, the sleep problems as well.
I guess a big part of that as well is what comes with alcohol. Generally,
Yeah.
a later night and those other things as well on top of that, isn't it? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, well, I say not many people, but I don't think I'm quite aware to the rest of the world. In some cases, I say not many people drink alcohol without it being an event or something like that. But it is a pretty common thing actually for people to just, they have 2 or 3 glasses every night.
Yeah.
Is there a benefit to the timing of that? Like, someone goes, mate, you're not taking away my beers or my wine at night. Like, is there a way you could be like, well, at least at a minimum, don't have it X amount of time before bed?
Yeah, I think further away from bed the better. And if you're having 3, maybe just try 1. I mean, I don't want to be a party pooper, but some people, basically the misconception is it's going to help me sleep. It really isn't.
This kind of gives you that, it knocks you out, but is that kind of, it doesn't give you, like, it's more rest, not sleep.
Yeah. So you're probably going to sit in that light sleep for that first period of the night. Whereas if you had sort of, let's say 3 beers at midday, it's not going to have the same effect.
Yeah. It'd be quite interesting then, I guess, to see, like you said, like for most people, they don't need to worry too much about like what a wearable tells them in terms of that percentage breakdown. Throwing one of these on someone that does drink alcohol quite consistently and seeing if that is consistent across people that are drinking alcohol 2 or 3 drinks at night, whether they're constantly finding that it's just very light sleep.
Yeah, so as someone who's worn different wearables for an extended period of time, there is nothing that affects my data more than alcohol.
Interesting.
And I'm not a regular drinker, probably. And I wore it all through my 20s. So the usual every other weekend, there's an event that you go to that you might have a few drinks. It's actually quite drastic.
Yeah. And you're talking, like you said, only a couple. Like you don't have to be on the piss on a bender or something for it to affect you either.
Yeah, there's a little one. Like I'm probably... these days probably more sensitive to it because I probably don't drink as much as I did when I was in my early 20s. But even 1 drink, I can see it in the data.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it showed once again, like we're humans of routine, aren't we? Like, and I think that comes to, wrapping things up there. Like nutrition, the people I've talked to, and from my experience, routines, habits, it's the basis. And as soon as you throw yourself out of those things, like it's massively, that's a big effect there as well. So I really appreciate that. That's a really cool chat. Lots that people can get value from. So if you're someone that works a lot and you travel a lot, then there's some stuff there for your jet lag as well as Gen Pop and athletes as well. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
No worries, mate.
Excellent. Thanks, Dean.